With just 2 weeks left in the regular season, we are inching closer and closer to those final playoff rankings. The newest edition of the college football playoff rankings, with the top four staying the same: Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, and TCU. Meanwhile, Tennessee, LSU, and USC are right there on the edge. But in the expanded 12-team playoff, they'd all be in. So we're going to have some fun with these hypotheticals here. Brad Crawford and Brandon Marcello joining me now. Guys, in the current format, quite a few teams in that 6 to 15 range would be solidly out. But the expanded bracket, of course, means these last 2 weeks of the regular season means a lot more meaningful games. And Brandon, you're specifically looking at one conference here.
Yeah, the Pac-12 this week, where everybody keeps looking at this week and going, well, there's not a lot of big games that really matter in this 14 playoff. Well, if you look at it right now, the Pac-12 would have two huge meaningful games this week, with Utah going to Oregon, of course, and USC and UCLA as well. But if you look at just this week, I was counting this up. When we talk about meaningful games that would impact the playoff rankings and teams that could potentially be in the playoff in a 12-team field, there are at least 20 games this week that would have a meaningful impact, led by those Pac-12 matchups. And of course, the crazy mess that is the Big Ten West right now, as they try to figure out who's going to represent that side of the conference in the Big Ten championship game. But a lot of big time games would be being played this week, and there would be a lot more drama going into this weekend. Whereas right now, everybody's just kind of sitting there waiting for rivalry week on Thanksgiving.
And you look at the current rankings, 6 Pac-12 teams in the rankings right now. Everyone so easily writes off that conference just because they have a tough time getting to the top four. We'd see so much more diversity in the playoff with the Pac-12's games this weekend. A main argument for this expanded bracket: it helps out the little guy. Not only does the highest ranked group of 5 champion get in, but I suppose, they could send some at-large teams as well. But Brad, you're not convinced G5 teams will make the playoff any stronger.
Yeah, the unpredictability at the top of the G5 ranks this season particularly would scare me a bit if I'm somebody expecting competitive football games. There's a lot of good teams in the G5s. There's not a great team, say a 2018 unbeaten UCF type team. And for a G5 to beat a top 5 or 6 team in the playoff, we would have to go on a year-by-year basis, and the matchups would truly matter. So this year, you look at a 12-5 scenario, we're probably looking at, Tennessee against Tulane or UCF. That would be a pick-your-score game for the Vols and Josh Heupel against his former program. I saw ECU quarterback Holton Ahlers a few weeks ago light up that UCF secondary. I mean, what do we think Tennessee quarterback Hendon Hooker would do to it? So it would take a couple years, in my opinion, for a G5 team to win a game in expanded playoff, if I had to project. And at least in recruiting, though, head coaches, recruiting coordinators could obviously preach inclusion. But I'll say this too: there's also another rope in this that kind of prohibits the G5 from doing well in a playoff, and that's NIL. No G5 is going to compete with the Power 5 and NIL era. So we're pretending that adding G5 teams to an expanded playoff brings parity, but I'm going to say that it won't.
Yeah, I think we're doing what we're doing here is we're projecting a lot. We're trying to figure out what the future is going to look like, and I don't think any of us really know. We can look at the past here and judge it based off of that when we talk about group of 5. We've had 15 ranked group of 5 champions, never included in the 14 playoff as it is now. 6 of those group of 5 champions were undefeated and were not included. Again, this is all about inclusion, and at some point down the road, because of that inclusion, that leads to more opportunity, not just obviously in winning games in the playoff, but improving NIL structure within these schools, improving recruiting, and of course, improving the statures when we talk about these group of 5 schools. So this is something I am with Brad. I don't think you'd see immediate success from group of 5 schools in the playoff. It would take a few years, maybe even half a decade, so to speak. But at some point, a group of 5 champions going to break through and win a first round game, and then win in the quarterfinals and make it to the semifinals. And then you've got some drama there. But seeing it right away, that probably is a stretch. And as it stands today, when you look at the playoff rankings, you would look at a UCF going to Michigan right now in the Big House. That would be a horrible matchup for UCF, of course. But at the very least, how crazy and amazing would it be to see Central Florida at Michigan in the cold in a December playoff game. That would be kind of crazy to watch.
It would be intriguing, that's for sure. So, guys, if an undefeated group of 5 team weakens the playoff field, let's take a look at Power 5 teams with multiple losses. We've seen many one-loss teams make the playoff in the current system. We've never seen a 2 or 3-loss team. Quite a few examples to choose from this year. Brandon, how do you think that would affect the postseason?
Yeah, we'd have some 2-loss teams in there. And even this year, I think we could have a 3-loss team in a 12-team playoff field. And that team would be LSU, which is set to go to the SEC championship game with 2 losses right now. As long as LSU wins out the remainder of this regular season, then goes into the SEC championship game against Georgia, plays a close game. I don't know how you drop LSU from where it is right now at 6 anywhere below number 11. I don't know if you could drop them 5 spots for losing in a conference championship game at that point. And so if that's the case, that would put them in the playoff field as the last at-large team, which that would be insane to see. I don't think LSU would be very competitive in a playoff field, much like these group of 5 teams we're talking about. But that would be something interesting to watch. And as the 4-team field, as we've seen in the past right now, we've had 5 one-loss Power 5 teams not included in the playoff field in its first 8 years, which is quite substantial. And all those teams, of course, would have been included in a 12-team field. And we may have seen quite a bit of parity. And we talk about parity. This sets it up for where we're going to see a 5 seed or a 6 seed potentially win the playoff in the future. Because if you look in the past, in these 8 playoff championships we've had, only twice has the number 1 seed won. That's just as many times as the number 4 seed, the last team in the playoff, has won the national championship. The number 2 seed has won the most, 3 times, and Georgia last year is the one and only number 3 seed to win the college football playoff national championship. So when we see this 4-team field, it's provided some parity from within that. So why wouldn't we have some parity when we go to a 12-team field? Maybe not necessarily immediately, but down the road, you're going to have a team that's outside that top 4 that wins the national championship.
Yeah, let's stay in the SEC, Brandon. I'm going to go with another multi-loss team, Alabama. There seems to be a mass assumption right now as we kind of project, and if we had a 12-team playoff this season, this is the middle of the Crimson Tide's worst season in 10 years, and there's some mass assumption that the Alabama Crimson Tide would win a couple games just because their talent is, I don't know, it's just starting to irritate me. Alabama has 1 win this season over a team that's currently ranked inside the top 25 playoff poll, and that's Ole Miss. And by the way, Lane Kiffin's best win this season, if you're not counting Kentucky because Kentucky has torpedoed, it's probably Troy. Troy's 8-2, has won 7 straight. So what does that tell you about the Rebels? Anyway, half the Crimson Tide's games this season have been decided by a single possession. They've committed the 3rd most penalties in the Power 5 ranks. The fan base wants both coordinators fired. So do we really think that Alabama would just show up and run the gauntlet against more complete teams in a 12-team structure? If so, we're just ignoring that this team has serious warts, and we're just penciling in, playoff wins because Nick Saban is Nick Saban and he does well in the postseason. So Alabama's a team this season that if they were in a 12-team playoff, I don't think we can just, simulate the first couple rounds and expect the Crimson Tide to be in a semifinal game.
I think that it's possible they could. I mean, Alabama, their 2 losses right now have both been on the road in tight, close games, as we've seen. Tennessee, of course, being the big one that everybody sticks in their mind right now. In the first round matchup, we could potentially see, as it stands today, would be Clemson at Alabama in Tuscaloosa, which would be an amazing scene to see. I'm not sure, obviously, Alabama would run the gauntlet, but I think they have the weapons potentially to get to the national championship. And you give Nick Saban some extra time to prepare, as the old saying goes, with him, they could be very successful. But I think this idea that we just don't go to 12 teams because the number 9 seed, we just don't think they're going to win. We don't know that till they get on the field. And I know the regular season matters. It does matter. But when you're looking at potential of one, Alabama would be hosting a game. They would not be going on the road as they have struggled in the past. And then, of course, you go into neutral sites after that. Alabama very well could still make the national championship game with that type of road ahead of them.
Yeah, it probably depends on seeding. You're right. Seeding is going to matter in this 12-team expansion. If Alabama has a home game, obviously they'd be favored against most of the current field. If they have to go on the road, though, we've seen what the Crimson Tide do on the road this season. It's night and day difference. So I'm not going to lay too many points in this year's Alabama team in a 12-team playoff.
Well, you guys
Also, just how
alluded to it.
irritated would everybody be that it'd be Clemson and Alabama playing each other in that
I don't
first
want to see that
weekend? They'd be
again.
so
Yeah.
angry. I love it.
Finally got rid of them in the top 4. You guys alluded to it. The first round games will actually look like college football games played at home sites. Brad, how excited are you for this change?
Yeah, home field advantage means a great deal in college football, more than the NFL, more than, the MLB postseason. We see NFL teams lose all the time home playoff games. The division winner often loses to the wild card winner because the wild card team's hot. In college football, once we expand, I don't think you're going to see a ton of road teams win those first round playoff games. We saw Tennessee a few weeks ago, Brandon, had a litany of pre-snap penalties at Georgia because Sanford Stadium was such a wild environment, and that stalled possessions for the nation's most high-powered offense. So when you're playing behind the sticks on the road, bad things tend to happen. But if that game was played at a neutral site, say the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, would the score have been different? I think it would be. So I think it'll be very advantageous in the new playoff era once we expand to get one of those better seeds to play a home game.
Yeah, this is what those campus sites would look like right now. It'd be Clemson at Alabama, UCF at Michigan, as I mentioned earlier, Utah at LSU. Remember, Utah defeated Florida on the road earlier this season. And I hate to say this, LSU and Florida are kind of comparable this year. I hate saying that, even though LSU's quote unquote still in the SEC race and maybe the playoff race. And then you have Penn State at Tennessee. Talk about a contrasting styles and interesting matchup there. Can you imagine Penn State going to Knoxville? I think there are some winnable games there, especially that Utah LSU game there potentially. Of course, would have work to do in the Pac-12 right now, but some amazing first round matchups. And listen, as Scott Strickland, Florida's athletics director, said earlier this preseason, he said these games would be the biggest in campus history at any of these sites that host a first round game. The environments would be unmatched.
Yeah, I don't like Utah's chances at night in Baton Rouge by any means, and especially and Penn State at Tennessee. I mean, Penn State's a team that goes 3 and out pretty often. You get behind 14 points at Neyland Stadium, man, it's going to be a wrap.
It'd be a culture shock for a lot of those teams and fan bases. All right, thanks, guys. And remember, for all the latest updates in college football and exclusive scoops, subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel and 247sports.com.